Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Spink, and I was the non-government organization co-chair of this CASA project team that worked on odors. And we were at last year's conference, and some of you may have heard us, and we were talking about what we were doing. And it's nice to be here to be able to tell you what we've done. And I think what we've done is a good piece of work that will advance odor management in the province. And we're going to give you in the next 20 or 25 minutes a very quick overview of what is in this Good Practices Guide for Odor Management in Alberta. And I will start by a little bit of history on CASA, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, so I'll go through it quickly. And the process that we followed that has led to this Good Practices Guide. And then Humphrey, who was our industry co-chair for this project team, and he's from the agricultural sector. And Richard Sharkey, who is our government co-chair with Alberta Environment and Parks, will give you some details on what exactly is in this Good Practices Guide, and hopefully tweak your interest enough that you'll go and check it out. What is CASA? Clean Air Strategic Alliance. It was formed in 1994, and I hate to say it, but I was there at the time, and it was really a new way of doing business in Alberta in terms of managing an issue and a topic that was fairly contested at times, some of the air issues that we were dealing with. And so it was formed in 1994, involving three caucuses, industry, government, and non-government organizations, focused on providing advice and products that would advance air quality management in the province. And decisions are based on collaborative process. And this is a definition of consensus collaborative decision making. And I think the important from my perspective, and I've been involved in CASA project teams in my previous life as a government person, I was involved, and now I'm involved through the Environmental Non-Government Organization, and Humphrey and I are on the CASA board right now. But the key thing is that you come to the table as equals, and you work as partners to try and find solutions that advance everyone's interest. And sometimes your positions may change, and by that I mean you may think you have the right way to advance or address that interest, but there are other ways to do it. And at the end of the day, if the outcome is something that addresses your interest, then hopefully you can agree to it, because that's why you're at the table and you get consensus. And on our Good Practices Guide team, everybody came to the table with an interest of trying to advance odor management in the province, because odors are an issue that rural municipalities have to deal with, urban municipalities have to deal with, industry has to deal with, and communities have to deal with. And so it's in everyone's interest to try and come up with tools and guidance that will help improve odor management, and that's what this Good Practices Guide tries to do. CASA has a vision for air quality, and that vision starts with the air will have no adverse odor. And it used to be we'll have no odor, and that vision was changed about 10 years ago, because of course, when you're out in a pine forest, you do get a nice odor. But if you're by a sewage treatment plant, and I worked at a sewage treatment plant one time for a year or two, and every morning when I drove into that plant, it wasn't too pleasant, but fortunately my nose turned off very quickly, and I worked without any problems. But so odor is important in terms of air quality. Very, very important measure of air quality. And so in 2012, a group of CASA members brought forward this, what we call a statement of opportunity, and said, odors are an issue in the province, and we should be looking at ways to improve odor management. And the CASA board agreed, and members from each of the 3 stakeholder groups went off and they developed a work plan. And that work plan came back to the CASA board, and the work plan looked at, well, what could CASA do? How long would it take? How much money is it gonna, who should be at the table, and so on. And so they came back to the CASA board in 2013, and the CASA board said, yep, we like that plan. And so a project team was formed. And that project, the work plan, involved these 7 topics that are on the screen. So odors and health is an issue. You'll hear a little more about that in a bit. Odor assessments, how do you do odor assessments when you have a problem? Prevention and mitigation. The ideal situation is you prevent odors from being produced, but that's not always possible, so then you're looking at mitigation. How you handle complaints, very, very important. And that's a big part of this guide. Enforcement and regulation. There are pieces of legislation in the province that deal with odors, but it's pretty minimal. And so the idea was, what are some of the options in this regard? And Richard's going to talk about those. And those first 5 topics, it was decided that we would form task groups of people that had expertise in each of those areas to go off and develop sort of a comprehensive, an expert report, if you like, on each of those topics. And in terms of the last 2, education, communication and awareness, and continuous improvement, the whole project team looked at those. So the 5 task groups that worked on each of those topics each produced a report, and those reports are available on the CASA website. And if you've got an interest in one of those or more of those particular topics, I would urge you to go to the website and look at those reports. We've tried to capture some of the key things from those reports in our Good Practices Guide, but in some cases there's lots of good information in these task group reports, and the one in particular is the one on odors and health. And I'll come back to that. So we had these 5 reports from those task groups, and then the challenge, of course, is how to put it into this Good Practice Guide, because we had, let's say, 400 or 500 pages of material. Now there was overlap in some of that. So the issue was, how do we produce a document that's user-friendly but contains the key information? And so we had a process to do that. But coming back to this odors and health issue, we asked the task groups to tell us what was absolutely essential from their perspective to go into the Good Practices Guide. And the Odor and Health Task Group, which did a lot of work. We had 3 medical doctors. 2 of those are academics at the University of Alberta, and lots of health officials. And they put together a summary of what is known today about odors and health. And they said we can't condense that down. So in the Good Practices Guide, there's just a little bit about odors and health, sort of a very quick overview. So if you want to look at odors and health, you've got to go to that task group report. So this is the structure, the chapters in the Good Practices Guide. And Humphrey and Richard will give you a little bit more detail on what's in each of those. There's a lot on odor complaints. And I think the feeling in our project team was odor complaints are often the first time that somebody realizes that they may have a problem with their operation that's annoying or a nuisance for someone. And how odor complaints are handled in the long term or in the short term can determine whether or not you have a long-term chronic problem with odors. So the guide, it's about 100 pages. It's easy to read. We spent a lot of time with a graphics designer to make it easy to read. And we've tried to focus on issues that are situations that are relevant to Alberta. But having said that, the Good Practices Guide is, I think, relevant to any jurisdiction anywhere in the world that deals with odors. And Richard and I gave a presentation at an international odor conference in Toronto on the Good Practices Guide in September of this year. And we had speakers from Australia, from Italy, from Germany, from the UK, and everybody has the same type of problems and the same issues to deal with when it comes to odors. So, and we think our Good Practice Guide, and a lot of people who heard about our Good Practice Guide at that conference felt that it would have application. And so we think it certainly has lots of good application in Alberta. And the last comment I'll make about it is that there's lots of tools and approaches that can be used to assess and manage odors. And the question is often, which tool should I use in which situation? And we tried to provide a very simple key roadmap for people to help them decide which tool to use when and where. And so that's sort of the front end of info on the Good Practices Guide. And now Humphrey is going to go into some detail.
My name is Humphrey Bannock. I'm Vice President with the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. I was the industry co-chair for this group for the management team overseeing the Good Practice Guide and Odour Management team. We had representatives from industry, from forestry, mining, chemical industry, oil and gas, agriculture, and I'm sure I missed a couple others around the way, but we had a very good representation of industry. Working in a consensus approach, as CASA does, can be a challenge for us many times because, as you all see, there's adversarial comments from either side. But when we come to the end, the CASA is built on consensus, much like your synergy groups are, and I think that that's a very important part of it. I am a farmer from Camrose, Alberta. We farm 7,000 acres in a family farm operation. My brother, my wife, my son, myself, we've been there for 115 years. And the environment and the land that we farm on is very important to us. It always has been. And we have, myself, I live in Pipeline Central, I like to call it. I have 5 Enbridge lines running across my place. One gas well, a gas line that goes with it. An ATCO service line, 6 and 8 inch service lines that are coming across, and a TELUS fiber optics line running across the back. So what I can do in my home quarter is very, very limited compared to the others. So I do understand some of the challenges people have. Understanding odor, the first part of our guide. It's very important to understand what odor is and its properties to understand what odor is. Frequency and duration of occurrence, the sources, and the impact on health and well-being of people who are affected by odors that are around our industrial or any of the applications we have. We looked at odors from a wide range of sources: backyard fire pits, municipal wastes, municipal lagoons, a barbecue, a canola field, industrial waste, our livestock operations, our cattle feeding operations, our pig operations, from the oil sands, from any kind of activity. And as you looked at all those odors, you understood that all those odors may not be offensive to everyone involved with them. Some of them are good, some are bad, but they are all odors. And it was a very wide range. When we had started, the wall was just covered with understanding odor. So that was one of the first jobs we did, is understanding what odor is. Well, it's fairly general in nature. This section of the guide is talking with anybody dealing with odor management or experiencing odor issues, just so you can understand exactly what the basic information necessary to understand what an odor is and how it goes, how it can affect you. Odor and health. This is not a well-understood link, and it's very hard to document. The guide is a very high-level overview of some of the factors that need to be considered when looking at the impact of odors on health. It provides an overview of the anatomy and the physiology of the human olfactory system, how we smell. How do we smell those odors? How does our body accept them? One of the stories that I do remember hearing is that as a person is impacted by odors, the first time you may smell an odor, it comes up as your mind and you feel that you don't like it. You don't like the smell. The second time you may smell it, you like it even less. And after being subjected to that over many times, your body actually comes to a point in time where you may develop some health or some body reflexes to it, not just a dislike to it. So understanding how odor works and how those repeated occurrences to odor can affect and possibly affect your health is very important. Everyone experiences odor in different ways. Health concerns are actual health effects. How do you document whether it's an actual health effect or a perceived health effect? The chemical mixtures affect human health are better understood. As you understand, we can measure chemicals in the air. Those things are much easier to understand than the effects of health on people. As David said, all these, the health report will be part on our CASA website. So if anyone has more questions, please go there as you go through the guide. It's very detailed. As David said, there were over 150 pages in each of these reports. As part of our good practice guide, what we came up with was tools that people can use as they assess odor. The system odor and tracking tool is one of them. Everybody experiences it in different ways. And this tool that we have here allows us to detail the date, time, location, okay? The intensity, put an intensity down there, okay? The symptom occurred and other relevant. Odor details, the date, time, and some of the other things. It allows you to detail these things, and most importantly, it allows you to have that record as you move forward, It's just a tracking tool. There's an available online version on the CASA website, and it's to track it. It's meant to aim at capture date, time, location. Keeping records can help people understand and track how odors are affecting their lives. Such a record can also be very important when you go in to see your health professional to talk about your health effects, maybe from this, and in detail when it affected you. The intent of the tool is to be used privately by individuals to record and keep their healthcare information for their doctors. Odor prevention. We all know that odor is there. How do we prevent it? Prevention and mitigation is described as a suite of tools to prevent or lower emissions and reduce the occurrence of adverse odor effects. Mitigation techniques are commonly used and target odors after they are generated. It's very difficult to put in mitigation things before we realize an odor will be there. There are various prevention and mitigation tools can be used depending on the circumstance and selection. The guide outlines a very large number of them. This gives a picture of a source pathway receptor model. To understand odors and the prevention of them, you have to understand how they move, how they work. This model generally traces the substance's move from an origin, the source, to a final destination, the receptors. The nature of the source will determine and define how and where the odor is released into the environment and who it may affect. The odorants will travel as a pathway carried by wind, And they may pass by fence, trees, or other objects that can be mitigation tools in the future. Finally, the end individual is the person the odor affects, where they live, work, dwell, and meet and become the receptor. And they can be adversely affected by these odorants. All three components of the model must be linked to have an odor issue. Our do, plan, and check model. We apologize for it being this small. We'll take it back to the staff. It's all on them. They did this presentation. Plan includes the initial discovery, screening, and assessment of the odor potential of the site or facility. This is meant to, when we're planning new sightings of places or industrial sites or whatever in our municipalities and the areas we live. Plan to get around them. Review possible options. Are there other places for this place to be? Scenarios. Will there be a different process that can be used to lower the emissions of odors? And the probability that these odors will have adverse effects on people and people around them. Do. Implementing the adopted model. So you've come up with a plan. Let's put that plan in place. Installing and establishing the prevention and mitigation tools and monitoring requirements so that people around it, that you can minimize the number of complaints you have. Checking. That's where our complaints process comes in. Constantly ensures that the requirements are being met and people are not being affected by the odors from the industrial developments, by the developments. Establishing and using monitoring systems can be very important, and it can be, a lot of the times it's important for the industry to do internal and in-house checks on their systems. And to act. Maintaining and constantly reevaluating the odor potential, plans, and systems. Act and improve as needed. No plan is ever the best. We can always plan to be better. The tools, as I said here, there's benefits and considerations. This is part of the toolbox we have here as you go through the prevention and mitigation tools. Once we understand how the odors will travel to the receptors, we can put in place mitigation tools to lessen that travel of those odors. The guide has 10 types of prevention and mitigation tools along with a list of benefits and considerations of each of them. So there'll be a full page of these tools and benefits, a couple pages of them. It provides a brief description of all the tools that can be used, but in-depth information that can again be found in the report on the CASA website. And I can't stress enough going back to that CASA website to be just to find that report. I'm going to turn it over to Richard right now, but I'd like to thank Gary Redmond, was part of our management team. He represented synergy around our management team table. So you were represented around this table. It was very good to have Gary there on our management team and on some of the working groups. I think that was very helpful to moving this forward. And I think that recognition that synergy was involved in this whole process is very important to us.
Thank you, Humphrey. I'm Richard Sharkey. I am an air policy and technology specialist with Alberta Environment and Parks in the Air and Climate Change branch. I'm just going to continue going through the contents of the guide. So we're now on the odor assessment chapter. Did you take? Go. Odor assessments can be conducted for a variety of reasons. As such, there are many different tools which can be used to conduct the assessment. There is never a single standard method or approach for conducting an odor assessment. And there are a number of elements to an assessment. Source odor measurements, dispersion modeling, ambient air testing and monitoring, and any assessment will consist of a variety of those. The guide goes over each of the elements and provides a brief description of tools that can be used. Again, in-depth information can be found in the consultant's reports. So an odor assessment tools guide is included, which is intended to assist users in determining which specific assessment options should be considered in different circumstances. The tool includes a table that identifies the assessment types that should be considered depending on the purpose of the odor assessment. For each of the suggested steps, there is a more detailed matrix, which isn't shown in the slides but is in the guide, that helps to determine which tools may be more useful. It is primarily intended for non-experts, we're looking for general guidance on the steps that should be considered to address different types of odor issues and management considerations. All right. So odor management, and this will cover some of the regulatory options. Odor management involves the application of the appropriate tools to understand and effectively manage odor. There are many possible regulatory approaches for managing odors, and there are challenges in determining the best option for controlling odor impacts. Odor sensitivity varies among people, as does the level of annoyance associated with an odor. Consequently, most jurisdictions use multiple approaches when considering and addressing odor issues, and no single odor management approach is capable of covering all situations. Regulatory approaches for managing odors were classified as being related to specifying either acceptable ambient odor levels, acceptable odor emission levels, or possibly a combination of the two. 8 ambient-based systems and 2 emission-based regulatory systems were identified and analyzed. The guide summarizes the analysis that was undertaken on each of these options, and for each option provides a table listing the relative strengths, weaknesses, and considerations. The guide provides a brief description of the tools that can be used, but in-depth information, again, can be found in the consultant's report, along with the consultant's recommended approaches. Odor complaints. The odor complaints section is probably the largest section in the guide and would make up its own guide. It has 3 main elements. There's information and guidance to help organizations set up an odor complaint management process, from taking complaint to the factors to consider in investigations. There is a referral process guide. Sometimes organizations receive odor complaints and don't know where to refer the call. This process can help with that. Admittedly, this is also a problem that the GOA has faced. People don't know who to call. We're working on that. There is a public information handout that organization can help to use and educate the general public about reporting odors. As part of developing the guide, we created a template for an odor complaint form. And it is very detailed, so you won't be able to read it in a slide. It gathers the information that most organizations would find necessary and helpful when investigating an odor complaint, and is designed to be customizable to different complaint receptors, be it industry, government organizations, municipalities, etc. This is a more customized version of the flow chart when dealing with odor complaints. The boxes to the right are designed to hold information about the local sources of odor, so this would be a specific one for a specific industry to use. When a call comes in, the operator can ask a series of questions and capture the information on a call log. And then based on the answers to those questions, the operator may refer the call internally or provide the caller with a number where they should be actually reporting the odor. The goal of this is to reduce caller frustration by directing the caller to the correct organization right away. Just last week, we had a call that somehow made it to the minister's office rather than to people who actually deal with emergency complaints. We need to fix that. As I mentioned earlier, well, actually, as David mentioned earlier, 7 key areas of focus were identified, but only 5 task groups were created. 2 areas, continuous improvement and the education awareness and communication strategies, were thought to have a cross-panel role. In terms of continuous improvement, the first thing that we all agreed on is that the guide must be a living document in order to remain relevant and useful. So the odor management team is recommending, as is common with CASA projects, that there be a full review and, if necessary, an update on a 5-year cycle. To be of use, the guide must also get into the hands of and be used by people who actually deal with odor issues and odor management. So part of what we've done is develop a release strategy and a set of communication tools that will result in what we hope is widespread awareness. Presenting here is part of that. All right. So, the website actually went live last night at about 4 o'clock. Hard copies of the guide should be available by Friday, we hope, maybe earlier. This all just happened in the last couple of days, getting it finalized. The guide will be posted to a bit of a microsite within the CASA website, so users may browse and link to the sections of interest to them. There's a web version and a PDF printable version. The website will also host all of the customizable tools, forms, and templates that are part of the guide, and it will host the consultant's full reports as well as the final reports, meeting minutes, everything that happened at the Odour Management team. That's pretty much the end of the presentation. Please take a look, and if you have feedback, submit it to the email address on the slide. That would be casa@casahome.org. I need to give some credit to the CASA Secretariat. Amanda Steparik was the project manager that pushed a lot of this through, and without her, we would have gotten nowhere. Unfortunately, the CASA Secretariat wanted to be here today, but they are busy with some other work. But they certainly sent their regards. All right, and with that, I will hand it back to Rick.
We can throw the floor open for questions. I got a couple of my own, but I'll wait and see if other people ask them first, because you'll probably put it much more succinctly than I would. So, questions for the panel?
I guess the biggest win from the industry side is that the conversations we've had and the understanding of dealing with both government from the regulator side and the non-government organizations that were around the table, that conversations we had around there, to understanding how the things that we do in our industries affect the people around us, understanding exactly how that happens, and then from the tools and the work we did to understand how we can help to allay those fears, those anxieties, and the things that we put upon those other people. So that would be the biggest win for us is the understanding that's going to come out of this. The good practice guide is here for planning in the future, when we're going to plan for municipalities to plan in the future as they plan industrial developments. They can look at the good practice guide as how to best manage from an odor perspective that goes forward. So that would be our biggest win, is just that understanding and that ability to sit down across the table and talk with people. And that's, to me, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, the fact that we've come together as a group and can all agree that we have some issues that we need to work on and solve together.
Anything to add, Dave? Are you good?
Well, yeah, I certainly agree with my co-chair's comments. I think that, yeah, the biggest win from the ENGO perspective was to get this issue addressed with all of the key stakeholders around the table, and to identify the options that are available to deal with odors. And so, the key will be, does the guide advance odor management in the province over the next 5 years? But one of the challenges I've had, and I deal with odor issues on behalf of First Nations, is that everybody says, well, what can we do? It's odors. Is there really a problem? And this good practices guide outlines, hey, there's lots of things you can do. There's lots of assessment approaches available. And so in some ways, it allows us, the ENGOs, to keep Humphrey and industry hold their feet to the fire when there are these issues. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but it really does provide the information to say, hey, there are things you can do. Or you're telling me this, but here, this is what the guide says about odors and what constitutes a significant odor or could constitute, and why haven't you looked at this? So whether or not that actually happens, but that'll be the big win. That's the idea behind this document.
Great, thank you. We had back in that corner.
Hi, yes. There are 13, I believe, mutual aid groups in Alberta, and odor often is associated with emergency, and so the odor investigations we do within the mutual aid groups are kind of emergency response-based kind of investigations. Is CASA going to have any communication with the mutual aid groups in Alberta about their odor complaint process or their odor complaint referral portion, I'm wondering?
I guess as a management team, we looked at ways to get the complaint process out to the call operators, to groups such as yours. So I guess our management team kind of committed to, if it came time to do some processing or some learning or some educational processes to explain to you how our process would work, our complaints process, and to go out to the operators and possibly provide this. We are struggling with finances, with dollars and cents to provide this free. But, if there was a need, I'm sure we could find some way to get out there and deal with you and go through the complaint process we've developed and how your operators could best use it to direct things down the right lines.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think so.
Just was checking down there, because the way you're looking,
Yeah.
oh, do you agree, do you disagree, what's going on?
No, I certainly agree. The complaint process is meant to be generic so that any organization that would deal with odor complaints can use it. In an emergency situation, it's a little bit different. It's not just odor anymore. So at that point, Alberta Environment or Alberta Energy or the AER should be responding to that kind of emissions if that's the kind of thing you're talking about. So it may come in as an odor complaint, but it might be something that we need to get an investigator out on right away. And we do need to kind of sharpen up those communication lines.
Great, thanks.
David, this was mentioned in your portion of the presentation. You said that odors and health are very misunderstood, and until it's better understood that health effects assessments be used when responding to odor complaints. Where does one find these health effects assessments, and what happens with them?
Did I say all that? Yeah, the challenge has been with odors in the past, based on my experience, is that odors are viewed as a nuisance and an annoyance. And of course, nuisances and annoyances can create things like stress and affect sleep patterns, affect behavior in terms of, do I want to go outside? And so odors have a whole bunch of sort of what we've been calling indirect health effects. And I mean, if odor gives you a headache, I'm not sure that's an indirect health effect, but the challenge has always been that, okay, we've analyzed the air quality at the time of that odor event, and we can't identify anything, any compounds in that air sample that should be giving you a headache. So we can't do the traditional exposure effect linkage. And so the issue becomes, and that was part of the idea behind the health tracking tool that was developed, was initially to help with that issue, to provide information on, okay, these people are experiencing, we'll say, hydrogen sulfide type odors, and they're getting headaches, they've got sleeplessness, and so on. But because of some privacy issues, it was decided that we couldn't make that big leap and start to use that. So at least initially, the information would be captured. The person could go to their health professional or, Alberta Health Services if they want to share it, or with the government if they wanted to share it. And that would help us try and understand how these odors can actually have these effects, that we can't draw the link between this chemical and that effect. And, and that's what that chapter or that report from the Odor and Health Task Group tries to identify this issue. And you know, it's very difficult, and of course it was a big issue in the Peace River situation, that, and it is an issue up in the oil sands, that people are complaining about these things, but really you can't, there's no hard science that says, yeah, there's a real problem here in terms of health. So that's sort of what I was driving at with that. And it's a problem. It came up at our odor conference in Toronto, this issue of people are prepared, I think, to live occasionally with some odor if they think, well, good practices are being applied. But as soon as it starts to affect your health, then the tolerance for those odors just, you know, drops like a rock. So, Richard, you want to add anything?
I don't really have a lot to add to that. It's just the link between odors and actual direct health impacts are very difficult to quantify, and it's something we're continuing to look at.
Great, thank you. One up here.
This is for Humphrey. As one farmer to another, realizing that quite often my farm does have some stink, what are we looking at to mitigate agricultural odors? To me, the stink often smells like money, but maybe not to my acreage neighbors.
I guess as you look through that, is, you know, from agricultural operations, whether it's a pig operation, a poultry, or dairy or beef operations, 3 times of the economic cycles, it can just smell like a big hole or money. Depends how times are at that particular time in the economic cycle. I guess there are tools, and you know, a number of years back we did a confined feeding operations working group and management team, and we came up with ways for agricultural operations to manage some of the odors and emissions from our confined feeding operations. So that work was done by CASA. Injecting manure, working it in quicker, those type of things are going to be part of what we need to do. From a perspective of a farm leader, nutrient management plans are going to be critical to us in the future, where we're spreading that manure. Setbacks from waterways and water resources are going to be more critically done. Areas where we just can't spread, you won't be able to spread a number of years in the same place through nutrient management plans. Those things are all part of where agriculture is going. We're getting there slowly, and I think that your operations are out there. And I guess I ask the other people in the room that aren't involved in agriculture to realize that every industry has a small percentage of people that kind of go outside the rules, and they're the ones that get that usually bring up the big stories. You know, that 1 or 2% of the operators that fall outside the rules. And please don't paint the whole industry as with the same brush as those 1 or 2 people, because I know that I have operators in my area that have been dumping along the highway for the last 5 years, and I'm thinking, like, you guys own 20 quarters of land. Can you not move away from the highway? And so it's those things. Don't paint all of agriculture with the same brush, because there are some very good operators out here looking for very innovative ways to reduce those smells. And mitigation, whether it's distances, setback distances, that comes down to our municipalities and our plannings. When we have an operation, we have to make sure that we keep those setbacks. And there may be people around us that are subject to development, can't develop in those areas because our operations are there. I mean, if we have an operation there and someone moves in, it's how do we mitigate that at that time? So it may come down to municipal developments to make sure that around some of these sited areas where we're grandfathered in and cited, that we don't have municipal development coming in close to us and creating the hazard that they're not the hazard, but creating the problems that are there. So I think that every day we have all kinds of research and stuff being done to mitigate our emissions and our odors, and I think just stay on top of it, and we'll do our best through planning to mitigate it.
More questions for the panel here? I had jotted some down myself. There's one over here, Jan. I had jotted down, some down myself, thinking, oh, these are really good questions I got down, and you guys have been using them up like 60, so.
Yes, hi. I'm just wondering what the signs are on the corners of the road with CASA. Is that an ongoing program that you're monitoring, the air in those areas?
So where are the signs?
Well, I live at Burn State Lake, and I've come across the Cranlin Road and go up what we call the Plant Road, and there's a CASA sign right on the corner. Very small, just a little pole in the ground, and it says CASA.
I don't think it's our CASA. Does it look like this? Can you see that?
It looks like a sort of a directional sign, just the ASA, and it's on a small white stick, and it's there on the corner.
Don't think it's ours.
Yeah, I know there's Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, and it does, now that you mention it, I do believe there is, I have been asked about a CASA in another role, but I can't remember what that acronym stood for, but it's not ours. We don't, the CASA organization doesn't have site-specific projects.
Good. Great. Well, thanks. While I'm waiting to see more hands come up with more questions, I'll kind of scan here. There was one that had kind of jumped out at me. I noticed in the presentation you had mentioned the form for people to fill out if they've smelt something, and like when, where, and the effects that they have for the odor, plus any health effects and the timing and all the rest of that. And it had me wondering, based on some of my own experience with people coming to me with, yeah, I've been dealing with this issue for a while, and you'll ask them, well, when did it start? And, well, I don't know. So I saw that tool as a very valuable tool for tracking recording. I was wondering, do you guys have any thoughts or ideas around getting pieces of the guide that are relevant, specific to things like that for folks that are kind of in their hands and easy to use, rather than, okay, that was on page such and such of the guide, or I have to go fire up the dial-up and wait for it to charge up and then check out the website?
That is an issue that we have with agriculture. We have a lot of our members and people are in remote areas where we don't have good internet service. But I do encourage people to use as best they can the website, because the forms are all on there in printable, downloadable forms that you can take and keep. Once you get one form off, you can continue to use it. The health effects, that form you're referring to, I mean, keep it handy. I mean, that's how you can start to document some of these issues. That's how we as industry can take these back. And when you go to a healthcare professional, you have documentation. And that's always so important, as anyone, I know a few times through the conference already, documentation is an important thing. And that's where we look at these forms, for whether it's the health, the effects, the complaints form, whatever it is. The forms are there. Please download them and use them. We spent hours in meetings coming up with how the forms looked. And we did our best to make them in a very clear, concise form that everyone should be able to follow through it and use very easily. If you did want, I mean, they will be in the Good Practices Guide, and if you can get to the CASA.home.org, our secretary, I'm sure, would be happy to get you some in a hard copy in the mail.
Good, thanks. I know very often I get that and I say, well, they have a website, and by the time I'm halfway spitting out what it is, they say, yeah, I don't care. Is there a number I can phone? So that's good. Thank you.
So we have a question from the floor. If a landowner, community member has an odor concern and they think they know which industrial partner might be responsible, do you encourage them to contact the company first and then proceed with you, or how would you suggest that people proceed if they think they know the source of the odor?
Well, large industrial operations will generally have environmental management plans in place and should be able to handle complaints. Smaller operations might not, and in that case, if it's agricultural, it's a little different. But if it's, for instance, oil and gas industry, wastewater, pulp, etc., the Alberta Environmental Hotline would be the number to phone, and they will know how to direct that call, whether it goes to compliance, investigations, or should be treated as an emergency.
We've got a follow-up.
Okay.
Oh, right, sorry. The reason why I ask is, and certainly appreciate the value of what you're offering. I guess my concern would be if there's a larger issue, that the company should be made aware of that odor, because like someone here said, it could be indicative of a larger issue, which the company then should be aware of to mitigate, so.
Yeah, if it's a new issue that hasn't been noticed before and is possibly plant upset, something like that, absolutely inform the company, but we would also like to know. If it's an ongoing issue, that might be a different case. The company should be aware of that already. And in that case, it may be something that Alberta Environment Compliance or AER Compliance needs to deal with, or whichever regulator is responsible for that industry.
Thanks. Going over here, Jan?
Yes, I have some serious concerns about the statement that you've said there's no real science on odors and health impacts. We have to sort of be a little bit more clear on that. A lot of the things that we're discussing aren't odors per se, they're emissions. And there is a very large and very clear body of evidence that SO2 and H2S affect health. Your benzenes and all your BTEXs are known to affect health. So are your PM2s, your diesel particulate matter, your total reduced sulfur compounds, and your carbon disulfide. So there's an enormous body of evidence there that says these emissions do affect health. So how is CASA dealing with that?
On those specific chemicals, it is kind of outside the realm of CASA, I would say. Those are generally handled by ambient air quality standards that are generally regulated. So that's government regulation.
But I think, CASA has been involved in some things like develop the ozone and PM management framework for the province that was built upon the Canada-wide standards, because as Richard says, you do have the Canada, now the Canadian ambient air quality standards for two parameters, PM and ozone, and hopefully SO2 in the near future. And they're going to start working on NO2. There are ambient air quality objectives for benzene, toluene, xylene, ethylbenzene, so the BTEX compounds. And CASA has not yet been involved directly in developing ambient air quality standards to try and define what are safe, acceptable levels for those compounds, because certainly you're right. Those compounds all do have health effects, and at least some of them are somewhat odorous. But generally, the levels where you have a health effect, and there's been a lot of study on this, the levels where you have a health effect are much higher than the levels where you experience an odor. So for the most part, if you just, for example, what's a good one to pick? Well, we'll pick hydrogen sulfide. The health effect level for hydrogen sulfide, subject of much debate, but would not be anything less than 100 ppb, 100 parts per billion, and yet the odor threshold right now is 0.5 parts per billion. So there's quite a gap there between, you smell it, and is it going to affect my health? Well, it may affect your health because of the way you're responding to the odor, but in terms of an actual toxic effect, there's no evidence that we have that you would get that at that concentration. And so you're right that probably most odorants, because these are compounds that your body is saying, hey, beware, there's something out there that might be harmful to you. Fortunately, our bodies have evolved that those levels where they detect it for most things are well below the level where you keel over so that you can get out. So most odorants are toxic, have well-defined toxic effects, but at much higher concentrations. And so what we're dealing with here is those health effects that odors produce that are not related to that toxic physiology reaction in your body, but the psychological response that we have to those odors. But you're absolutely right. All those emissions that we're talking about that are odorous, a lot of them, and particularly the industrial ones, at higher concentrations, of course, they can have health effects.
And then it's disingenuous for CASA to go forward and say that there's no real science on the health impacts of these odorous compounds, when in fact they're emissions and they are causing health impacts. Benzene smells sweet. It's deadly, but it smells sweet. H2S, yes, it's got a small odor threshold, but then at higher thresholds, you can't smell it, but it's incredibly dangerous.
So again, I just want to interrupt here, just basically to remind that we were on the topic of the odor management, so we weren't talking emissions management, and I think that was kind of what the clarification that was coming in as we were talking about, if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I was hearing from the panel was that when you're talking about the odors at these levels where they're not up at that considered toxic health level, there's that area in between that you guys were addressing. That's
And the
what I
guide
thought I
is
was
pretty
hearing.
clear, I think, that when you deal with odors and there's health involved, if you know what's in the air, you look at those levels, and if they are at those health levels, then that's a health issue.
Yeah.
Right? You're not dealing with an odor issue. You're dealing with an absolute health issue, and you should proceed accordingly.
Could you proceed accordingly in the event, though, the AER does not have a public health mandate. Alberta Health Services, there's nowhere that you can call. CASA obviously does not deal with it at this level. I would like to know where I go with a health impact for an air quality emission. There's technically nowhere in Alberta that will deal with emissions that are impacting health.
Okay, good. So I think with that, that's the question. I think it's been attempted to be answered here within the scope of what CASA has to offer. And with that, if you want to take a stab at something, fine. If not,
I'll maybe,
move on.
I'll maybe step outside of our working group here, our management team. CASA has done a fair amount of work across many sectors. We've done electricity framework review, emissions from power plants, confined feeding operations emissions. I had another one in my mind here. We've done a number of areas, but the CASA work does not set regulation, does not set. We come up with recommendations for the industry to work with and the government. And what happens with our recommendations is just a recommendation to the government and to the industry to follow. It has nothing to do with setting regulation or levels. So we are not a regulator anywhere near or sort to that. That's the CASA group. We make recommendations to the government, and the reports are all available on our CASA website on all these flaring and venting. There was a whole working group on flaring and venting and the emissions from flaring and venting. It's on the CASA website. I guess I can encourage you to go there and look at what we recommended. And remember, those are our recommendations from these three sectors in Alberta, the non-government, industry, and the government themselves. They're the recommendations that are there. We provide them to the necessary or to the sectors within the government to do as they see fit. So that's where CASA fits into it.
So, okay, but this isn't an AR panel, so it's good.
Yeah.
Thanks, gentlemen. Okay. Good. So with that, we'll move on to the next one over here. Thanks, gentlemen.
Great. When a large agricultural or industrial facility with known expected odors is being planned in an area that includes significant residential development, what kind of steps should or could the facility be expected to take to plan for mitigation of known and expected odors? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? Okay, perfect.
It's a big question. Well, there are...
So the first line of defense on agricultural operations is generally setback distances. So when planning a new operation, the known odor sources will be required to be a certain distance from residential. Now, usually new agricultural developments aren't in already populated areas. They try to avoid that. But for something like a poultry operation or pig farm, for example, technology requirements can be put in place. Standards on the maximum number of head that can be in the operation at any time can be in place. Most of these are handled by Alberta Ag. The guide itself can give some suggestions on how to better mitigate, how to better plan when building these operations in advance, and possibly how to mitigate after the fact, especially if a population has built up around it. But those pre-planning things are pretty much regulated by Alberta Agriculture, so that would be where to go first.
And part of that siting process, the municipality has a say in it, the government of Alberta. And even there are processes that are available, scrubbing processes for emissions. We attended the waste treatment facility in Edmonton this year, and they were bringing out of a compost facility, and the air coming out of there was clean. They had a chip bed that would take most of the smell out of this air. So there are processes and that may be part of the plan or the licensing that's involved to put these things in place to say that these are the processes that the industry at that time will use to scrub the air or to mitigate the odors.
I think if I could add that my hope is that one of the outcomes of this guide will be that the government will develop more formal guidance on the type of assessments and prevention, mitigation, evaluations that new industrial operations have to do as part of their approval process. And because, as Humphrey said, there are lots of options available. And in some situations, they're automatically applied. I'm thinking of vapor recovery systems from tanks in the refinery industry, but until recently that was not always the case in the heavy oil industry. So, but there are procedures and approaches that can be done to get a much better handle on whether or not this new operation is going to create odors or contribute to odors that already exist in the area. And the best way to deal with those, of course, is at the front end of the process and make sure that the company is applying best practices. And that's my hope, that the guide will help in doing that, because that's what the guide really outlines, what you should do if you want to manage odors. Here are all the things that you should look at. Here's how you can assess them. Here's the modeling that you can do. So it really is a good how-to guide, and it just has to be used.
Great. So I have not seen any more hands go up, and I think that was kind of almost like a final slide, that final push for that. So again, I'd like to thank our panel for their presentation, and also to